On your screen right now is a tweet from Barack Obama which states, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion." It's a tweet that's become the most retweeted Twitter feed in its history, in Twitter's history. But is this statement, is this quote right? Are people born prejudiced? Or are they not? This is Being the Other. I'm Dr. Dwight Turner. Let's find out. Welcome back. This is Being the Other. I'm Dr. Dwight Turner. And what we're going to talk about today is actually how is difference formed. We're going to look at childhood and look at how children relate to the other, because I think it's a very important part in our understanding of just what difference is. Now, there are many different perspectives, but one of the ones that I lean towards most of all is that of Jean Piaget. I hope I pronounced that right. My apologies if I haven't. Now, he was one of the contemporaries of Sigmund Freud, and they worked together in many different arenas to try to understand human nature. And one of the things that Piaget actually did, which was actually very useful in understanding formations of difference, was to highlight that there are actually three different stages that children go through in their formation of an egoic sense of self, which are to do with how they relate to the other. For example, between the ages of 0 and 2, children, he stated, understand what is them and what is not them, but they see the world from a very narcissistic sort of place. So they only really understand their own perspective on the world. His idea then progressed to between the ages of 3 and 6, for example, where children take on a more egocentric perspective, where they can actually acknowledge that there's an other in the world, something that's not themselves, but they find it very difficult to actually attain and hold that opposite perspective. Then from the ages of 7 and 8 and onwards, they move on to a more sociocentric perspective, whereby they can actually start to empathize and recognize difference between them and another, and they're not frightened by it. Now, even though his ideas, I've put them quite simplistically here, are relevant, there is another layer to this which I feel is very, very important for me to mention at this point, and that is the influence from the outside towards the child. What we're talking about, what Piaget's talked about here, is how children relate from the internal to the external. So how does the external influence a child's perspective on difference? Let me give you an example. For those of you who don't know me, which is most of you out there probably, I'm actually ex-military. I used to serve in the Royal Air Force. I did some time abroad in Germany. Good times, wouldn't knock it, taught me an awful lot about myself. Now, this story comes from when I was on guard duty at an RAF camp in Germany back in the early 1990s. It shows how long ago this was. Now, I'm on guard duty, myself and a colleague, and a car drives up to the gates. And in this car, there are two adults at the front, a mother and a father. The father's driving the car, and there are two children, two girls sat in the back. Now, I'm doing my checks and so on, and so is my colleague. We're checking ID and whatever else, as you used to do back in those days. And one of the girls in the back of the car winds down her window. And she looks at me and she says, "Why are you black?" Now I'm like, well, just because I am, I guess, and start a little conversation with her, which she's not really listening to. So what she actually says at some point is it because you are bad? Interesting comment. Didn't know what to do with it. But what was most interesting about this story is the reaction of the parents themselves. Now, the mother looked shocked. The father looked up at me, put his foot down, and drove up the road as fast as he possibly could. Now, in the context of what I've actually just given you about Piaget, this story is actually quite important. The child is making a very simplistic relationship between, well, I'm white, so therefore I'm good, and you're black, so therefore you must be bad. Very simplistic. But it's the parents in this example who hold the most weight. The mother's reaction, shocked reaction, and the father driving away and not actually explaining to the child what difference is all about is probably, I could argue now, as a doctor of this sort of subject, quite detrimental to that child's understanding of what difference is. Think about it. How children respond to them seeing somebody who's of Muslim faith in the street, wearing a hijab, or whatever it might be, or a same-sex couple holding hands, or whatever it might be. How that's held, how they understand that is one thing. How they gain understanding from their parents is another layer on that. And if the parents' prejudices influence the children, then what can happen is those children become quite stunted in their growth, in a way, in their ability to understand and relate to the other. So when we go back to Obama's tweet, then what we have to recognize is it's only half right. Encounters with different people, genders, cultures, whatever it might be, encounters with difference for children are actually quite problematic. So when parents, when elders, when adults fail in their responsibilities to actually teach them what difference is all about, then problems occur and children struggle. This is hugely important to be aware of. And when we recognize that, then we start to recognize our responsibilities. I have it the same way as a parent. Our responsibilities towards our children so that they recognize and they can understand and empathize with the other. Now I'm going to leave this simple podcast there for today. Again, as always, it's a pleasure talking to yourselves. Keep sending me your emails and whatever else. I look forward to hearing from you and talking to you again in the near future. Take good care. Bye-bye.